Well, before we go, yesterday I spoke about the charging of a distinguished Australian soldier who had completed 7 deployments, 3 to Afghanistan, in under 2 years. All up, approximately 250 missions in 2 years. A remarkable Australian. I've spoken to his wife, who's in a state of great distress. This man gave his life to the service of his country. He has been named, he should not have been named, and I'll come to that in a moment, Oliver Schulz. I argued yesterday that these men, the SAS, are the very best, and they're sent to the most dangerous areas. The Taliban in Afghanistan weren't playing in a sandpit. War is fundamentally about killing or being killed. But now we know what happens, don't we? We send these men into war, and they're either killed in combat or metaphorically killed when they come home. Oliver Schulz, a risk to nobody, is in custody. He's in jail, a risk to nobody. The soldier who avoided being injured in combat, now permanently injured at home. I read last night an affidavit filed by Major General Bilton on behalf of the Commonwealth in the Ben Robert Smith VC defamation proceedings. The affidavit was filed in support of an application that all former and current members of the Special Forces, now I thought this was already accepted, but he's filing an affidavit, all former and current members of the Special Forces have their identities protected. Oliver Schulz could have been charged if they wanted to charge him and not named. So what's the agenda here? The Major General Bilton affidavit is publicly available on the Federal Court of Australia website, sworn by him, and sets out why it was considered necessary to protect the identities of current and former members of the Special Forces, including, but not limited to, the safety of those persons and their families. The family of Oliver Schulz has gone to hell and hasn't come back. Other veterans have been treated as criminals, not yet named, without any access to justice. Remember what's called the Yamashita Standard, where, and I quote, "The highest ranking officer is accountable for and should be prosecuted and convicted of the crimes of every officer and soldier under his command, even if he or she is unaware of that crime or was aware and actually gave orders to stop it. Ignorance of the actions of his or her subordinates and failed attempts to stop them are not a defence," unquote. So, why are the officers in charge of the Afghanistan operation, the highest ranking officers, why aren't they charged if Oliver Schulz can be charged? But the Brereton report found that the commanders of Australia's Middle East operations, who included the current Chief of the Defence Force, Angus Campbell, in charge of Afghanistan operations from 2011 to 2012, Campbell was not accountable, according to Brereton, because in Brereton's words, they didn't have, quote, "a sufficient degree of command and control to attract the principles of command responsibility," unquote. Now, hang on, Brereton. This is not what the Yamashita Standard says. Yamashita was court-martialed for, quote, "failing in his duty as commander of the Japanese forces," unquote. But the Brereton report, from which we're now naming and charging and shaming Oliver Schulz, is at pains to exonerate the commanders. Indeed, Campbell, now the Chief of the Defence Force, is a former commander, actually apologised to the Afghan victims' families. Campbell's effectively exonerated in the Brereton report, but he was commander of the Middle East operations known as Task Force 633. Remember, this is the Taliban our men were fighting. If Major General Brereton, the author of the Brereton report, knew Campbell, who was in command when these alleged offences took place, what weight can be given to Brereton's virtual exoneration of Campbell and repudiation of the Yamashita Standard enshrined in the Geneva Convention to which we are a signatory? That, quote, "the highest ranking officer is accountable for and should be prosecuted and convicted of the crimes of every officer and soldier under his command," unquote. Major Bilton's sworn affidavit argues that, quote, "the identity of personnel are protected from disclosure to the public," unquote. And he makes the point in the affidavit that, quote, "combating the Afghan insurgency was a complex, difficult and dangerous mission. The insurgents proved to be an